In the heart of Seattle, 1995, a figure emerged from the shadows that would haunt the FBI for years. They called him Hollywood not for his looks, but for his theatrical approach to crime. Picture this: a man walks into a bank wearing a face that isn't his own, created by movie-grade prosthetics that would fool even close friends. This wasn't just another desperate criminal with a gun. This was an artist, a mastermind who turned bank robbery into performance art. What you're about to hear is the true story of America's most sophisticated bank robber, a man who pulled off 18 impossible heists and vanished like smoke, leaving behind only legends and a trail of empty vaults. The Lake City Bank in Seattle seemed like any other financial institution on that fateful day in 1995. Tellers counted money, customers filled out deposit slips, and security cameras recorded every mundane moment. But hanging on the wall was something extraordinary. A wanted poster featuring a man known only as Hollywood. The irony was delicious. Here was a criminal so bold, so confident that he would return to rob the same bank twice. As mourning customers went about their business, none of them realized they were about to witness criminal history in the making. The stage was set, the players were in position, and Hollywood was about to make his most audacious entrance yet. 1 week. That's all the time that passed between Hollywood's first strike at Lake City Bank and his return performance. Most criminals would flee to another state, maybe even another country. But not this man. He understood something that law enforcement didn't expect: sometimes the most dangerous place is also the safest. As he approached the bank's entrance, his transformed face caught the morning light. Professional makeup, a carefully styled wig, and clothing that made him look like any other Seattle businessman. The wanted poster with his alias mocked the FBI from inside, while the real Hollywood walked freely among his hunters, invisible in plain sight. Transformation. What made Hollywood truly terrifying wasn't just his boldness. It was his complete physical transformation for each heist. While other bank robbers relied on ski masks or bandanas, Hollywood employed the services of a professional sculptor to create silicone prosthetics that completely altered his facial structure. Cheekbones raised, nose reshaped, jawline modified. He became a different person entirely. These weren't cheap Halloween masks that could slip or be easily removed. These were custom-crafted pieces that took hours to apply and created faces so realistic that even his own mother might not recognize him. In an era before advanced facial recognition technology, Hollywood had found the perfect way to hide in plain sight. Hollywood lived by one unbreakable rule: never spend more than 2 minutes inside a bank. He had studied police response times with the precision of a military strategist, calculating exactly how long he had from the moment an alarm was triggered until the first patrol car arrived. 120 seconds, that was his window between success and capture. As he entered Lake City Bank that second time, his internal clock was already ticking. Every movement was choreographed, every second accounted for. He knew that somewhere in the bank, someone would hit the silent alarm. He was counting on it. The real test wasn't whether he could rob the bank, it was whether he could do it fast enough to vanish before his 2 minutes expired. The bank's chief consultant had one job when trouble arrived: stay calm and hit the silent alarm. As Hollywood raised his weapon and commanded everyone to remain still, trembling fingers found the panic button. The signal went out immediately. Police dispatch, FBI field office, every law enforcement agency in Seattle suddenly knew that Hollywood was striking again. But the robber seemed almost to welcome this development. He had planned for this moment, trained for it, and timed everything around it. The alarm wasn't his enemy, it was his starting gun. From the moment that button was pressed, Hollywood had exactly 2 minutes to empty the vault and disappear before Seattle's finest surrounded the building. While amateur robbers focused on teller drawers with their limited cash supplies, Hollywood thought bigger. He moved directly to the vault where the real money waited. This wasn't a grab-and-run operation, this was a precision strike designed to maximize profit and minimize risk. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in neat stacks, organized and waiting. As law enforcement raced through Seattle streets, sirens wailing, Hollywood calmly filled his bags with more money than most people see in a lifetime. His hands never shook. His voice never wavered. This was a man completely in control, even with the clock ticking toward his capture. Every second was calculated, every movement purposeful, every dollar stolen with surgical precision. 90 seconds remaining. Hollywood emerged from the vault, his mission nearly complete, when the distant sound of sirens began to pierce the Seattle morning. Most criminals would panic, make mistakes, leave evidence behind in their haste to escape. But Hollywood had rehearsed this moment countless times. He moved through the bank like a dancer following choreography, checking his watch, adjusting his route, and maintaining the calm demeanor that had made him legendary. As the first police cars rounded the corner, their lights flashing and radios crackling with updates, Hollywood simply walked out the back exit and melted into the Seattle streetscape. By the time officers stormed through the front doors, he had vanished completely, leaving behind only empty vault shelves and bewildered witnesses. Special Agent Sean Johnson stared at the empty vault and felt the familiar sting of defeat. This was the second time Hollywood had struck Lake City Bank and the second time he had disappeared without a trace. The FBI's finest minds, equipped with the latest technology and unlimited resources, had been outsmarted by a single man with a talent for disguise. Witnesses provided descriptions, but they were useless. Every person described a different face, a different person entirely. Security cameras captured clear images, but they showed a man who didn't exist in any database. Hollywood had achieved something that should have been impossible in modern law enforcement. He had become a ghost who could steal millions and walk away unseen. Before he became Hollywood, before he masterminded 18 bank heists, Scott Scurlock was just another medical student with dreams of helping people. Born into a middle-class family, he excelled in his studies, particularly chemistry, where his analytical mind found patterns and solutions that others missed. His professors saw potential for a brilliant career in medicine, perhaps research, maybe even teaching. But beneath the surface of this promising young man lay a restless spirit that couldn't be contained by lecture halls and laboratory assignments. The conventional path toward becoming a doctor felt like a cage to someone whose mind was already calculating risks, probabilities, and the kinds of chemical formulas that had nothing to do with healing the sick. Scott's first taste of criminal profit came not from banks, but from his understanding of chemistry. Using his medical school knowledge, he began producing illegal substances with the precision of a pharmaceutical company. This wasn't street corner dealing, this was high-end manufacturing that required scientific knowledge, proper equipment, and careful attention to detail. The money came easily, flowing in amounts that dwarfed what he could expect as a starting doctor. But more than the profit, Scott discovered something intoxicating about operating outside the law. There was a thrill in the secrecy, the danger, the knowledge that he was outsmarting not just competitors but law enforcement itself. This early success planted a seed that would eventually grow into something far more ambitious and dangerous. With his drug profits, Scott made a purchase that would define his criminal career: 40 acres of isolated forest land in Olympia, Washington. But he didn't build a conventional home. Instead, he constructed something that seemed torn from a childhood fantasy: a massive treehouse, complete with multiple levels, hidden compartments, and most importantly, secret escape routes that led deep into the surrounding forest. This wasn't just a house. It was a fortress designed by someone who understood that his lifestyle would eventually attract unwanted attention. Every beam was placed with purpose, every window positioned for maximum visibility of approaching threats. The treehouse became his sanctuary, his planning headquarters, and his escape route, all rolled into one magnificent structure hidden among the trees. Success in the illegal drug trade proved as fragile as it was profitable. When Scott's primary dealer was murdered in a deal gone wrong, his entire network collapsed overnight. Suppliers disappeared, customers scattered, and law enforcement attention intensified around anyone connected to the victim. Scott found himself cut off from his primary source of income, sitting in his treehouse fortress with expensive overhead and no way to pay for it. Most people would have looked for legitimate work, maybe returned to medical school to complete their degree. But Scott had tasted something more intoxicating than money. He had experienced the rush of beating the system. Rather than retreat to conventional life, he began looking for a new way to maintain his lifestyle while feeding his growing addiction to risk and excitement. In 1991, a movie hit theaters that would change Scott Scurlock's life forever. Point Break, starring Patrick Swayze and Keanu Reeves, told the story of bank-robbing surfers who used masks of former presidents to hide their identities while pulling off impossible heists. For most viewers, it was entertainment. For Scott, it was a revelation. Here was a blueprint for combining his need for money with his craving for adrenaline. The movie showed how bank robbery could be elevated from desperate crime to sophisticated art. The robbers in the film were cool, calculated, and nearly impossible to catch. They lived by their own rules and answered to no one. As Scott watched the screen, he wasn't seeing fiction, he was seeing his future, his calling, his destiny as the mastermind behind the perfect crime. Scott's first bank robbery in 1992 was a disaster that would have discouraged most criminals. Partnering with a friend and using cheap masks from a costume store, they targeted a small suburban bank with all the precision of a hurricane. Their getaway car wouldn't start, forcing them to steal another vehicle while police sirens grew louder by the minute. Witnesses got clear descriptions despite the masks, and security cameras captured footage that made identification possible. They barely escaped, and for days afterward, Scott waited for the knock on his door that would end his criminal career before it truly began. But instead of fear, he felt something unexpected: exhilaration. The rush of adrenaline, the high-stakes problem-solving, the dance with danger, it was addictive in a way that no drug could match. Most criminals would have taken their narrow escape as a sign to find legitimate work. Scott Scurlock saw it as a learning opportunity. He analyzed every mistake from that first botched heist with the same methodical approach he had once applied to chemistry experiments. The cheap masks were useless, they obscured vision and could be easily removed. The stolen getaway car was unreliable and drew attention. The chosen bank had too many witnesses and too many cameras in bad positions. Most importantly, they had no real plan, no timing, no understanding of how law enforcement would respond. Scott realized that successful bank robbery wasn't about desperation or violence, it was about preparation, precision, and understanding your enemy better than they understood themselves. This analytical approach would transform him from an amateur criminal into a professional mastermind. Hollywood's disguise system. Scott's solution to the identification problem was revolutionary for its time. Instead of relying on masks or simple disguises, he enlisted the help of a sculptor friend to create custom silicone prosthetics that completely transformed his facial structure. These weren't theatrical makeup effects, they were medical-grade appliances that changed his bone structure, eye shape, nose profile, and jawline. Each prosthetic took hours to apply and required professional makeup techniques to blend seamlessly with his skin. The result was a complete transformation that created a new person entirely. Witnesses might get perfect views of his face, security cameras might capture high-definition images, but they would all be documenting someone who didn't exist in any database. Someone who disappeared the moment Scott removed his disguise in the safety of his treehouse. Hollywood's bank selection process was more thorough than most people's house hunting efforts. He would spend weeks studying potential targets, learning their routines, their security measures, their cash delivery schedules, and their police response protocols. He mapped out every camera angle, every sight line, every possible escape route. He timed the distance from nearby police stations and calculated response times based on traffic patterns at different hours of the day. He studied bank employees, learning their habits and identifying who was most likely to panic and who might try to be a hero. This wasn't guesswork, this was intelligence gathering that would make professional spies proud. By the time Hollywood decided to rob a bank, he knew it better than most employees who worked there every day. Hollywood's most famous trademark was his strict adherence to a 2-minute time limit inside any bank. This wasn't an arbitrary number, it was based on careful analysis of police response times across Seattle and surrounding areas. He knew that most silent alarms would trigger immediate dispatch, that patrol cars could cover certain distances in predictable timeframes, and that his window of opportunity was exactly 120 seconds from the moment he entered until the moment he needed to be gone. This time constraint forced him to work with mechanical precision, eliminating any wasted motion or unnecessary actions. Every second was accounted for, every movement choreographed, every word spoken calculated for maximum efficiency. The 2-minute rule transformed bank robbery from chaotic crime into choreographed performance. As Hollywood's confidence grew, so did the sophistication of his methods. Early robberies focused on teller drawers with their limited cash supplies, but he quickly realized that the real money sat in bank vaults. This required new techniques, better timing, and more precise intelligence about when vaults would be most profitable to target. He began tracking armored car deliveries, learning when fresh cash shipments arrived and when vaults would be fullest. He studied bank procedures, understanding how employees accessed vault areas and what security measures protected the biggest prizes. Each successful heist taught him something new, and he applied these lessons to make the next robbery even more profitable and efficient. Hollywood wasn't just repeating the same crime, he was evolving, improving, and perfecting his craft with each new target. When local police departments couldn't solve the growing string of bank robberies, the Federal Bureau of Investigation stepped in with their advanced resources and experienced agents. Special Agent Sean Johnson was assigned to lead the Hollywood investigation, bringing years of experience in white-collar crime and bank robbery cases. But Johnson quickly realized this wasn't a typical criminal they were hunting. The evidence patterns were unlike anything in FBI databases: perfect disguises, precise timing, zero physical evidence left behind, and witnesses who described completely different suspects despite viewing the same person. Johnson found himself investigating a criminal who seemed to understand law enforcement procedures better than most agents. The FBI's usual tactics of building psychological profiles and predicting behavior patterns simply didn't work against someone this methodical and disciplined. The investigation became a chess match between Hollywood and the FBI, with each side trying to anticipate the other's moves. Agent Johnson studied robbery patterns, looking for geographical preferences, timing habits, or target selection criteria that might reveal the robber's identity or predict his next strike. Meanwhile, Hollywood seemed to sense the increased attention and began varying his methods even more dramatically. He hit banks in different neighborhoods at different times of day, with different approaches and escape routes. Just when the FBI thought they detected a pattern, Hollywood would break it with a robbery that followed completely different rules. He began leaving false clues deliberately, sending investigators down dead-end paths while he planned his next strike. The game had become personal for both hunter and hunted. Between heists, Scott Scurlock lived like a man without financial worries. His treehouse became a showcase of expensive tastes: fine art, high-end electronics, custom furniture, and luxuries that most people only dreamed about. He threw elaborate parties for friends who had no idea how he afforded his lifestyle, spinning stories about successful investments and family money. He traveled extensively, always paying in cash, always avoiding the paper trails that might attract attention. But the money wasn't really the point. It was the freedom that money bought, the ability to live completely outside conventional society while maintaining the appearance of success. Hollywood had achieved something that millions of people fantasized about. He had beaten the system and was being rewarded handsomely for his rebellion. As Hollywood's ambitions grew, so did his need for more sophisticated intelligence. He began cultivating relationships with people who worked in banks or related industries, never revealing his true intentions but carefully gathering information about procedures, schedules, and security measures. Some contacts were innocent. Bank employees who thought they were dating a charming businessman with curiosity about their work. Others were more willing participants who provided specific intelligence in exchange for generous cash payments. This network of informants gave Hollywood unprecedented access to inside information that made his heists even more precisely planned and profitable. He knew when cash deliveries would arrive, when security guards changed shifts, and when banks would be most vulnerable to his carefully choreographed strikes. By 1995, Hollywood had achieved something unprecedented in American criminal history. He had stolen over $2.3 million from 18 different banks without ever being caught, identified, or even seriously threatened with capture. His methods had become so refined that each robbery was like watching a master craftsman at work. He could enter a bank, assess the situation, adapt to unexpected circumstances, empty the vault, and vanish before law enforcement even knew a crime was in progress. Media coverage had made him a folk hero to some, a criminal mastermind who represented the ultimate rebellion against corporate America and government authority. But success brought new challenges: increased FBI attention, more sophisticated security measures, and the constant pressure of knowing that his luck couldn't last forever. Agent Johnson's breakthrough came not from advanced forensic science or sophisticated surveillance, but from old-fashioned detective work and pattern recognition. After studying dozens of robbery reports, witness statements, and security footage, he began to see subtle consistencies that others had missed. The way Hollywood moved, his speech patterns, his physical mannerisms, these were harder to disguise than facial features. Johnson started building a profile based not on what Hollywood looked like, but on how he behaved. This psychological approach led to new investigative strategies, including the controversial decision to embed tracking devices in cash supplies at banks that fit Hollywood's target profile. It was a long shot, but Johnson believed that Hollywood's success had made him overconfident, and overconfidence led to mistakes. November 1996 would mark Scott Scurlock's most ambitious heist yet, a vault job that promised to net over $2 million in a single strike. This wasn't just another robbery, it was intended to be his retirement score, the crime that would set him up for life and allow him to disappear forever. He spent months planning this final heist, studying the target bank with even more precision than usual, mapping out multiple escape routes, and preparing contingency plans for every possible complication. The irony was perfect. After years of 2-minute robberies, Hollywood was planning to spend slightly longer in this bank to access a vault that required more time to empty completely. That extra time, those few additional minutes that promised to make him rich beyond his dreams, would ultimately seal his fate. When Hollywood entered his target bank in November 1996, he had no way of knowing that the FBI had prepared a surprise. Hidden among the stacks of currency were electronic tracking devices, invisible to the naked eye but capable of broadcasting location signals to law enforcement receivers. As Hollywood went about his carefully choreographed robbery, emptying the vault with his usual precision and timing, he was unknowingly taking the bait that would finally end his criminal career. The tracking devices were so sophisticated that they could pinpoint his location within feet, turning his greatest strength, his ability to disappear, into a liability. For the first time in 18 robberies, Hollywood would not be able to simply vanish into the Seattle landscape. The hunters had finally outsmarted their prey. The high-speed chase that ended Hollywood's career was like something out of an action movie, with police cars pursuing the robbers through Seattle streets while helicopters provided aerial surveillance. Scott's carefully planned escape routes became death traps as law enforcement anticipated his every move using the tracking signals from the stolen money. Gunfire erupted when cornered, and Hollywood's accomplices were wounded in the shootout that followed. But even facing impossible odds, Scott managed one final escape, abandoning his vehicle and fleeing on foot into familiar territory. For a few desperate hours, it seemed like Hollywood might pull off one last miraculous disappearance. But this time, there would be no treehouse sanctuary to retreat to, no new disguise to slip into, no way to transform back into the respectable citizen who had never existed in the first place. Scott Scurlock's story ended the way he had lived for the past 4 years, on his own terms, refusing to be captured or controlled by anyone else. When law enforcement finally cornered him, when all escape routes were blocked and his options had run out, he made one final choice that ensured Hollywood would never be taken alive. The self-inflicted gunshot wound that ended his life also preserved his legend, denying the FBI the satisfaction of a conviction and ensuring that Hollywood would be remembered as the criminal who was never truly defeated. His death marked the end of an era in American bank robbery, the conclusion of a cat-and-mouse game that had captivated the nation and frustrated law enforcement for years. Hollywood had achieved a kind of immortality, not the kind he had planned, but the kind that transforms criminals into legends and makes their stories echo through generations of dreamers and rebels who wonder what it would be like to beat the system, if only for a while.